The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, John Michael McGrath and I speak to Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy about the $200 you're getting in the new year. Then, Canadian actor Saul Rubinek joins us for a truly thought-provoking interview about playing Shylock. That's all next on The Agenda. Hey, partner. A little sugar off the top, as per usual. Now, I know a lot of people listen to this show as opposed to watch it on YouTube, but can I humbly suggest that this might be one of those episodes that they should watch instead of just listen to?
Yeah, I think, we are recording this on Halloween, and so we thought it would be appropriate to wear some costumes. And if you're listening at home, you're going to miss the sight of you in a very fetching original series Star Trek uniform and me with some Star Trek insignia on. So
I'm totally channeling the spirit of James Tiberius Kirk as I sit here in this beautiful yellow tunic, and I'll give it the push down like that, and there we go. I feel good to go. So, shall we get to issue one?
Let's get to it.
Okay. Mr. Scott, warp speed now. Back in the day, Ontario's fall economic statement was a very brief update on the state of the province's books. Now it's become a much bigger deal, almost like a second budget day, with new programs introduced and goodies to give away. Of course, the big highlight in this week's statement was the plan to give every Ontarian and eligible child a $200 check. JMM, let's get some more details on the fall economic statement.
Right. So there's been some changes in the government's fiscal state since the spring budget. The province's deficit will be $6.6 billion projected for this year. That's about $3 billion lower than was forecast when we last got a major update in the spring. The province's debt to GDP ratio is also continuing to fall. Good news if you're the finance minister. That means a lower debt burden for the province going forward. Ontario is projected to have a surplus of $900 million in 2026 and a deficit of just $1.5 billion next year. But remember what I said about a $3 billion improvement just between spring and now. So if the province's finances improve by even half as much as they already did in the last 6 months, the government could conceivably balance the books even a year ahead of schedule. I'm sure we will talk to the finance minister about that later today.
That's a very good point.
It does leave the possibility of a spring election coming on the heels of a balanced budget.
And as you point out, the finance minister will be here soon, so we will save some of our questions for him and move right on now to issue 2. The province announced this week that free flu and COVID shots are now available. And do I hear right? Have you been a good citizen? And have you got out there and got the jab already?
I actually did before it was announced, because I had heard from one of our colleagues here at TVO that some pharmacies essentially jumped the gun and last week were offering shots to all ages because there just wasn't a lot of demand. And so I walked in on Friday and said, hey, can I get my COVID shot? And they were like, yep, sure. It was very straightforward. I was going to get my flu shot anyway, because when I first came to Queen's Park over a decade ago, Deb Matthews was the health minister, and she always used to harangue reporters about making sure they got their flu shot. So I always have Deb's voice in the back of my head around this time of year.
I will be interested to see how much uptake there is on it this year. I know they're out there advertising now that the free flu shots and COVID shots are available. But we also know that a lot of people, for whatever reason, have just had it with COVID, and they are not interested in getting any more shots. Maybe they're going to mask up if they're in crowded places, but they're just not into it anymore. They're so over COVID. So I don't know what the prospects mean in that regard.
Yeah, and the government has also been quieter this year. Last year, when we got to this time of year, the government did put out at least a statement from the medical officer of health, Dr. Kieran Moore, saying, it's the start of, I think they were calling it vaguely the respiratory virus season or respiratory infection season, referring both to the flu and COVID. So far this year, I'm pretty good about keeping up on the press releases I get from the government, and I haven't seen anything from Dr. Moore. Certainly hasn't been anything like a press conference or anything like that. He's kind of gone silent, and I think the government has taken a much a quieter role.
You're being generous here.
I'm-
He's being silent for a good reason, don't you think?
Well, I think the government very much just wants to move on from any kind of thoughts of the pandemic and certainly public health measures, and they still, I think there's some resentments in provincial politics about how how politicians ended up wearing a lot of the blame for public health measures that were recommended by public health experts. That's a whole other story, as I say, I think the Premier has decided that, at least the Premier's office has decided COVID is over and we're not going to talk about it anymore.
Even though wastewater is still showing signs of it all.
And I mean, we still don't exactly have a hospital system that is like able to deal with even a bad flu season, much less the fact that COVID is still out there. So
there we are. And with that, we're off to issue 3. Well, it seems the Premier can't help himself when it comes to trying to find candidates to run in the next provincial election. Earlier this week, he was in Sudbury to make an announcement, and just before he left the microphone, he felt that he needed to point out that the local MPP, Jamie West of the NDP, wasn't giving Sudbury the representation the Premier felt it deserved. Here is what he had to say.
I got to leave it with this. I can't help myself. Folks, we need a voice down at Queen's Park for Sudbury. Because the guy you have down there is sitting in the corner playing cards. We have the mayor, a phenomenal mayor, by the way. What are you doing in the next couple of years, Mayor? I can't help myself, but...
So we can note here that the mayor of Sudbury is Paul Lefebvre, who was actually a Liberal MP, federal MP. So the Premier might be out of luck there. I can't help but remember the last Premier who waded into the politics of Sudbury specifically. She was Kathleen Wynne at the time, and she came to regret it, right? Her aides in her office were accused of corruption in their role of trying to manage a Liberal nomination there. So I don't know, man. It's a big old province, but I would leave Sudbury alone.
Well, Sudbury hasn't, I sort of appreciate the Premier's interest in this riding because Sudbury hasn't gone Tory since 1985. And if you look around Northern Ontario, there are other ridings like Kenora, Timmins, Nipissing, Sault Ste. Marie. They have all gone Conservative since then. They are Conservative right now. Sudbury has stayed stubbornly Liberal or New Democrat for almost 40 years. So the Premier clearly has the Nickel City in his sights, and he wants that for the next election.
Yeah.
We shall see. And up next, our conversation with the Treasurer. And we are pleased to welcome Ontario's Minister of Finance, Peter Bethlen-Falvey, to our onpoli set for the first time. The Treasurer is also the MPP for Pickering-Uxbridge. And as I like to remind our viewers and listeners occasionally when we have cabinet ministers here, our job is not to fight with our guests or argue with our guests. It is to better understand why they make the decisions they make. And so with that in place, Treasurer, welcome back. It's good to see you again.
What a great preamble. I love it.
Well, happens to have the added benefit of being true. I think that's the gig. JMM, over to you.
So I'm going to start with, I think, the biggest headline from the fall economic statement. Why have you decided to give Ontarians $200 a piece in the new year?
Well, first off, we've gone through a pretty high interest rate environment the last couple of years. Interest rates we haven't seen, inflation that we haven't seen in decades. We're of a certain vintage when we remember inflation being this high, but for many, it hasn't been this high. Big shock. So the cost of groceries, the cost of gas, housing costs have all gone up. And, we're flush with some good revenues right now. And so we're fiscally able to give some money back. It's their money. It's taxpayer money. And particularly the many households that continue to struggle, to give them some help at a time when they need it most. A family of 5, you get $1,000. So it's meaningful to a lot of people in Ontario to get this money at this time.
Let me follow up on what I said in the intro, which is we want to better understand how you made this decision, because presumably the idea here is relief. You could have done what you did. You could have chosen another way to do that, cut the income tax by the same amount of money. Why did you choose this approach?
Well, I think, I love lower taxes. That's always a path, and we're constantly lowering various types of taxes like gas tax and small business tax and other things like that. But this, when you do a tax return and you wait for the refund, it could be 6, 12, 18 months. This is relief that we can get into people's pockets quickly. So that was the big driver. And people need the money now. Even though interest rates have come down and inflation has come down, the cost of groceries are still up 20%. They're just going up slower now. But, a lot to, not just in Pickering and Uxbridge, but around Ontario, they're struggling to pay the bills. So we have the opportunity to be able to give some of that money back because things are better from a tax point of view.
You mentioned the timing, but the other context to the timing is that everybody in this room has heard the rumors that there might be an election in the new year, that this is a smart political move, not just a fiscal move, to send people checks before you go ask voters for another mandate. Are you going to deny here on our stage that this is a pre-election move as well as a fiscal one?
Well, a big disappointment for you. You're not getting any scoop here. And I got to tell you, we've been working on affordability since day one. Trying to put more money back into people's pockets, whether it's we cut taxes early in the first year, like the small business tax and other things. Return the driver's license fees, the integrated one fare. I talk to people about that integrated one fare. What that means, you can take Durham Transit down to the GO, hop on in Oshawa, take it down to the TTC, and come up here to the TVO studios, and you only pay one fare. Mm-hmm. And I've heard from so many people, not only is that convenient, but they're saving a lot of money. They're paying one time, not three times. So we've been focused on that, the gas tax cut that we've extended. This is something that as a government, we're looking to ways to put money back in people's pockets and reduce the burden of taxes and fees wherever we can. The the previous government did increase a lot of taxes, the driver's license fees, beer tax, wine tax. I frozen the beer tax. I cut the wine tax. We eliminated the driver's license fees. So we're constantly, as a government, thinking about, independent of any election, how can we help people? And we've been doing it for 6 years.
I do remember when Mike Harris was in power, this is going back 25 years now, they did the same thing. They had a $200 check that they mailed to everybody. But in that case, the budget was balanced, and they defined it as, this is in a way a taxpayer's dividend. We've had a very good year. The budget is balanced. We can afford to send you back this money. Your budget isn't balanced. You're more than $6 billion still in the red. So what's the fiscal sense behind this?
There's a lot of fiscal sense. First of all, for the recipients, should I wait 2 years when we're balanced and then give back a check? They need it now. They need help now. Number two, our fiscal situation, including the year we just closed, the deficit has improved by over $9 billion. Our interest expense has come down. In fact, year over year was down $1 billion. This year it's going to be down $1.2 billion from what we forecast, and over the 3-year period, $4 billion. So we're in much better fiscal shape. I got the credit rating upgrade to AA.
Just with one.
And two, have us
just
on
with
positive.
one agent. How many agencies are out there?
There's 4.
And how many gave you a credit?
One so far.
One so far. Okay. So
will you invite me back if I get the other 2 that have us on positive watch?
I think the one, was it the one you used to work for that gave you the credit rating bump?
Yeah, my team took the credit rating down in 2009. And almost to the day, 15 years later, the shoe was on the other foot. So I had to work hard to get it back up. And almost to the day, DBRS upgraded 15 years between a downgrade and an upgrade.
It was AAA in Bill Davis's day. What is it now?
Yeah, it's AA.
Yeah.
They moved it to AA. So I just believe, just like a family or business, you can't run deficits in perpetuity.
And yet, you could also target the $200 checks to people who are truly needy, people who have no fixed address, people who are on much lower incomes. I will get this check.
Say it.
Steve does not need this check, but he will get it.
He's getting it too.
You will get it, right? Even the Toronto Region Board of Trade, generally very pro-business and has said lots of nice things about your government. Not exactly a bunch of radical Marxists, but they said that this money would have been better spent invested in productivity improvements and more better investments for the economy. So why not target it?
Well, you may not need it, but the vast majority of Ontarians, I can tell you, are struggling to make the bill payments. Rent costs have gone up, mortgage costs. People are still rolling over a number of mortgages in a much higher interest rate environment. We talked about groceries. People right across the province many are struggling. So this is just an opportunity to support them at a time that they need it. I think that to the Toronto Board of Trade, it's not an either or. We're actually investing in a lot of productivity driven measures, not least of which is cutting red tape and regulations, lowering taxes, investing heavily in technology, investing in a more competitive environment. Our energy plan is very pro-productivity. By the way, we're in a pretty good position from an energy point of view relative to a lot of people because we have a pretty clean grid, and now we can really increase that clean grid in nuclear, like in Pickering. I've traveled the world. Many people don't have the same consensus we have for support for nuclear. Europeans want nuclear. The only two countries that I'm aware of that are not supportive of nuclear is Germany and Austria. I know I was in Sweden. They want it. France, of course, the UK, Romania is expanding. So we have many measures that we're taking to improve the economic prosperity and a potential for Ontarians.
I like that question. I want to follow up on your question because you're getting 200, I'm getting 200, you're getting 200. Instead of giving people at this table who, sorry, I'm going to speak for you here, who don't need the $200, why don't you give $600 directly to people who do need it?
I'm giving it to people, the taxpayers of Ontario, putting it back in their pockets. They can choose to do what they want with the money. And let's be clear, we income test a lot of things in this province. We income test disability payments, low-income seniors payments, child care tax credits, seniors tax credits. We indexed for the most vulnerable, the disability payments to inflation. Never been done before by any government. NDP, Liberal, we're the first ones. Same for low-income seniors. In fact, the disability payments have gone up 17% since we took over, including a one-time 5% increase, 4.5% increase in July, indexed to inflation. So we do income test a lot of programs. We are very focused on the most vulnerable and helping them out as well.
Again, this is more along the lines of tell us why you made the decision you made. I know you've heard this in all the feedback, is that, okay, you've got $3 billion extra in your pocket you didn't expect to have. You're returning it to taxpayers in the forms of these checks. Why not spend it on hospitals? We're going into flu season. They're going to want more money from you to deal with that. Why not deal with hallway health care? There were any number of other things you could have spent that money on, but you did this.
No. You see, you're following a line of thinking that says it's either or, because it's and. And if you really look at this fall economic statement and look at the healthcare spending, over the last 2 years, up $10 billion, like significant increases to the healthcare budget.
But their argument would be it could have been $13 billion.
Well, you could put another $100 billion in. You know, we have to respect taxpayers' money, allocate scarce resources, be stewards of taxpayers' money in a way that is efficient and effective. Now, let's look at healthcare for a second, Steve, since you brought that up. Look at some of the things that we did in the fall economic statement. We provided funding for the fertility program, $150 million over 2 years to help families. For those impacted, that's an incredible thing. The fertility tax credit. On the medical, we're creating new medical schools here in Ontario for the first time in a long time, increasing the number of seats, making more of them available to Ontario residents and Canadians. But there's another thing we announced on Friday as part of the fall economic statement, the Learn and Stay program. That's going to allow for, that's about $88 million over 3 years, 7,300 medical students. The potential to, if they stay in their communities when they graduate as a family doctor, will pay their tuition and a lot of other expenses. I was with some of the students on Friday. They were visibly emotionally impacted by this.
I watched the event. You could see
the burden is big, and they're passionate about being a doctor. So that's going to help roster over 1 million patients. So healthcare and building acute care beds, $50 billion. We're healthcare, home care, digitizing healthcare, more for mental health and addiction. It's not either or, it's an and.
I take your point that it is not either or, but one element where there's been some criticism in the numbers put out with the FES includes the not great targets for the housing starts. The province has a target of building 1.5 million homes by 2031. The target or the projections in the statement show us basically not making that target. At the same time, you are spending $2 billion in infrastructure to help municipalities build more homes, things like sewer and water. But it wouldn't at least some of that $3 billion maybe have been better spent, maybe bumping that $2 billion to $2.5 or $3 billion to really goose those housing production numbers.
Oh, you're falling into the trap again. It's not either or.
The same trap.
And the same trap, First off, we got another 7 years to go. So number two, we've put in billions already. We didn't wait for this fall economic statement to start putting money in. We put a lot in for, as you mentioned, for infrastructure, wastewater, for roads and bridges, and we'll continue to do that. Incentives for municipalities to hit their targets. Pickering hit their target in 2023. They've already hit their target.
You're getting
in
all the
2024.
local references to Pickering in today, aren't you? Wow. Okay.
Well, I get reelected as the MPP for Pickering Uxbridge, not as the Minister of Finance.
We get you.
So I think, and interest rates, we don't control interest rates. They had an impact on development. They're coming down. That will stimulate activity again. And, I set up the Building Ontario Fund, which is going to help with housing. So there's a bunch of tools in our toolkit that we'll continue to deploy. And we're not going to relent on this target because we want to encourage people to come to this great province. I strongly support immigration. Other than Indigenous, everyone came from somewhere else, and but we need the housing, but we also need the schools. We need the hospitals. We need the long-term care. We need the broadband, highways and the subways. So we also announced, the $190 billion of 10-year capital to keep building things. And that doesn't happen overnight. That you don't wait till a fall economic statement. You got to keep doing it and update and keep going.
We got time for one last question, and I noticed that you dedicate all of your budgets or economic statements to somebody who's been important in your life, and this one is dedicated to Peter Bethlen-Falvey. Not you, but a relative. Who is this guy?
Well, I don't want anyone to think I'm that immodest that I would dedicate the fall economic statement to myself. Well, Peter Bethlen-Falvey is a cousin of my father's. And by the way, there are not very many Bethlen-Falveys in the world. You can Google it. There aren't too many. 3 of them are named Peter. And there's another younger fellow in Budapest named Peter Bethlen-Falvey, but this is my dad's cousin. He lives in Brussels. He's worked in the EU or with the EU for 30, 40 years, refugees, immigration, that sort of thing. And he's visiting my dad, who's still around, flying in tomorrow on Saturday. So I dedicated this budget to a guy who's done great work over the years for many. And my dad's hanging in there. He's 94.
Wow.
And we're all going to have a scotch together. Right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we're putting you on notice right now. Next time we get you here, we want to have all the Peter Bethlen-Falveys here at once. We'll interview all of you at once. Treasurer, thank you very much for making the trip into TVO again. It's good to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that is the onpoli podcast for this Friday, November 1st, 2024.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast and our fine uniforms on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're located. What's next?
Captain, 2 to beam up.
Agreed. Beam us up, Mr. Scott. Until next Friday, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Here's the premise of a new play at CanStage called Playing Shylock. An actor, starring in Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, finds out during the intermission that the play has been canceled. From there, the actor playing Shylock talks to his audience about how furious he is with the decision and takes us on a journey, asking some tough questions about artistic courage, Jewish identity, and acting itself. The actor in this one-man tour de force is the great Saul Rubinek, and he joins us now for more. It is a delight to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you, Jim.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
What was it about the premise of this play that appealed to you so much?
Well, for one thing, I didn't know what theater we would end up in. It was COVID, and I met the writer Mark Liren-Young only on Zoom. Martin Kinch, who I've known since he was in his 20s, and I met him when I was probably about 19, 18 years old, was 80, and we re-met again after many, many years.
He's the director.
He's the director of Playing Shylock. And then Mark and I, the playwright, met, and then we started to talk about different things, and then he brought up this play. Mark Liren-Young had written a play called Shylock about 25, 26 years ago. It was a one-man show with this premise. That's all that was the same except for Shakespeare, some of Shakespeare's words, right? Otherwise, every line is different. And he said, look at this. And I said, it's a bit dated. And he says, what do you think? And I said, we started to talk. And then it wasn't like, oh, I've got to do this. It was just the joy of collaborating. And nobody's doing anything. We're stuck at home. And I was collaborating again with my old friend, Martin Kinch, and this wonderfully witty, smart writer from Victoria, Mark Liren-Young. And I suggested, you know, I've got to play an actor, right, who plays Shylock, who's pissed off. And he said, yeah. He said, what if the actor's name was Saul Rubinek? And he got delighted. I saw this little evil glint in his eye on Zoom, Mark Liren-Young, and from there he started to take off. And he said, I'm going to start watching all of your interviews over the years, and I'm going to use some stuff. And I said, okay, we can lie too. And he said, no, don't worry, I like to lie. And so there was something about it over 2 years, though. I mean, that's the thing, man. It was over 2 years, and I didn't know, none of us knew, if it would turn into something anybody wanted. In fact, a number of theaters turned it down. Never saying why.
But CanStage didn't, and I'm fascinated by that because part of the premise here is that you, playing Shylock, are told at intermission that the play's being canceled because they can't assure the security of the actors and the people who are going to come to the show because there are demonstrators and it's all wrapped up in what's going on in the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. And CanStage is very much one of the villains in this show because you're upset with them that
Hugely
they have
upset.
made the gutless decision to cancel your show. It's interesting that they would allow themselves to be portrayed in such a negative fashion in a play on their own stage. How'd you swing that?
I didn't. It was already in the script of whatever theater decided to take the play, that would be the premise. And Brendan Healy, the artistic director, was amused by it. And you got to hand him, you know, give him some credit for that. It's in jest, although we take it very seriously in the play. He likes the idea that engenders conversation, even though I disparage the fact that they say they engender conversation, but they aren't really having one when they cancel the play. So yeah, there's some courage involved in that, and it was humorous. But also, I would think what also attracted him was the meta thing that I, as the actor, had founded that place with a number of other people. Martin Kinch, the director, a number of other actors in the early 70s. That was Toronto Free Theatre. We cleaned the pigeon shit out of that place, and it was an old gasworks, and we called it Toronto Free Theatre. The tickets were free, and it was part of that really interested him. I can't speak for him. It'd be a good interview to ask why he did it, but I loved the idea of collaborating. That was what it was, and then it turned into something that I began to say, we've got to do it. And then nobody wanted it. Believe me, we tried. I would go on Zoom and I would audition this. On Zoom, I did a reading of it for quite a few theaters.
In Toronto?
No, around the country.
Everywhere? Oh.
A lot of places.
And they didn't want it because?
You think they're going to tell me? It doesn't fit our season. It's not quite right for us. You know, I don't know what the real reasons were. You tell me. You saw the play.
What do you think's going on?
I think it's gutless. I think there was an amount of courage. I think they didn't want the controversy.
Which is there. And well, let's start with Shylock himself. This is one of the great all-time characters in the theater's history. Can you unlayer a little bit of Shylock for us as to why he fascinates you so much?
Well, first of all, this is a fascinating piece. It is probably the first time in English literary history, in the history of English literature altogether, maybe the history of literature, that a Jewish character is presented as a three-dimensional character, even though he's a villain. He's got a decent motive. You have to remember that in England, when this was written in 1595, and I dispute that the man from Stratford wrote this in the play, but that's also my...
You don't think Shakespeare wrote this
But it's also my opinion, and I'm not alone. I mean, there are many, many people who doubt that the man from Stratford wrote much other than 5 bad signatures and a few letters about debts. But that's only important. We'll get back to that. Why is that important? Who gives a shit about who wrote it if you enjoy it? Like, do you care that Beethoven, Life of Beethoven, do you care that Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony, or just want to enjoy it? That's an interesting question. But what was going on then, there had been no Jews in England for 300 years. So if a play is called anti-Semitic, what is anti-Semitism if there are no Jews on the streets to attack, or in schools to attack, or synagogues to attack? What is anti-Semitism? Well, anti-Semitism then was a cultural thing. It was about Christ killers. It was about the Jews who were spawn of the devil. They were presented on stage as puppets with horns, and maybe real Jews had cloven feet. Maybe real Jews actually did have horns. Anyway, they weren't seen. On stage, they were seen as spawn of the devil. And they were not three-dimensional people. In fact, the big hit of the Hamilton of its age, written 5 years earlier by Christopher Marlowe, was The Jew of Malta. Massive hit, maybe a block away from the Globe Theatre. And The Jew of Malta, the guy is just evil incarnate. So here is a character, and your audience may not be aware of this, but the Merchant of Venice is not the Jewish character. That's an Italian Christian called Antonio. The Merchant of Venice, that's the title role.
Shylock's the moneylender.
He's a moneylender. It's 5 scenes. That's it, 5 scenes.
Pretty memorable.
Well, memorable enough that it made the careers of actors over 400 years of reputations of actors.
Right.
Why is a good question. Why? What is it about this character? Well, partly you have to see the play to see it, to understand a little bit about why. Playing Shylock gets into it. You know, and if you've got a great actor playing in Merchant of Venice, then you'd see it too. But Merchant of Venice is very rarely played these days with a Jewish actor as Shylock, which is part of the premise of this play.
I was going to get into that later, but since you raised it, why don't we get into that right now? We are at a time in the life of our country where it is no longer acceptable for a non-Asian to play an Asian character, for a non-Indigenous person to play an Indigenous person in a play, and yet for
there's a book written called Jews Don't Count.
Well, okay, maybe that's where we want to go with this. For some reason, you don't need to be Jewish to play Shylock. What do you think about that?
Well, obviously, I think a great deal about it, since that's part of the premise of the play. Look, there's a great line to play where I say, my manager calls me. I say in the play, my manager called me up when I was not getting a lot of character. He said, Saul, I'm sorry, they're not looking to cast old white guys in character roles these days. What are you talking about? I'm not white, I'm Jewish. My manager says, yeah. So the guys marching down the street chanting, Jews will not replace us, they don't think you're white, but they don't cast movies. The people who cast movies, they think you're white. And we have been maybe white for a sliver in history, but we are other, and we always have been other since probably the fall of the Temple of Solomon. And I don't really mind at all when non-Jews play Jewish roles. There is, yes, I understand why it is offensive to put blackface on and for non-Asians to play Asians. I understand that can be really offensive, especially since so many other cultures have been denied the amount of work in our culture as white people have, including Jews. So I understand that. However, I believe, yes, as long as that's said, that I believe that can be truly offensive, and that is a cultural appropriation under those circumstances. That said, I think acting, to a great extent, acting is appropriation.
You're pretending to be somebody you're not.
Well,
that's the whole thing.
Well, what is the whole thing? Being somebody that you're not is probably the only way an actor can show their common humanity with others. So you're somebody you're not in real life. Then you have to walk in their shoes. And that is the beauty of writing, art, everything. So there is a dividing line, and it may be gray. And although it's proper to object to when it's onerous and racist, it is also difficult subject.
Here's another difficult subject I'd like you to chew on, and that is whether this play has more resonance for you 13 months or so after the events of October 7th of last year.
One of the things I really avoid doing as an actor is to be any kind of spokesman for any kind of political opinion. I don't feel that I have the expertise, the background, the knowledge, and the education to be able to speak to that in a public forum. What I can do is, the words Gaza and Israel are nowhere in this play. And if they were, I probably wouldn't have done it. I'm not trying to, none of us.
The word Palestinian is in the play.
The word Palestinian is in the play appropriately, as one of the people who are okay to play Shylock these days. I say Shylock is played very often. Shylock is black, Shylock is indigenous, Shylock is Palestinian.
As a woman?
As a woman, yeah, that we talk about all that. But as a Jew, it's offensive to many people, and that's part of the story. So it wasn't, first of all, we started work on this before October 7th, but certainly it has to do with pre-Holocaust and post-Holocaust and Holocaust. It has to do with the history of the Jewish people, and that Shylock has been a lightning rod for anti-Semitism and debate since it was first on in 1595, before there were even Jews in England. So that is fascinating, because once you create a three-dimensional Jewish character, you can imagine this. Imagine that you have an audience in the 16th century. What were they used to? They were used to a Jew on stage that had a red wig. It was called a Judas wig, okay, because Judas was supposed to have had red hair. So they had red wigs. They had noses that came down and touched their chins. And they were comedy characters. They were played by the low clowns in the company, not by the great actors. And when they went on stage, the audiences threw oyster shells and figs. That's what they threw in those days. And they booed them and catcalled them and everything else. Now imagine you're a 16th century audience that's used to that. And you get this character that comes on stage, and he was dressed like that. There is record that Richard Burbage, not the clown actor in the company, the guy who owned the theater, 30-year-old Richard Burbage, owner of the Globe Theater, and who had just played Richard III. He was the star actor, not playing the central character of the Merchant of Venice, but playing a 5-scene role. Why? Probably because of this, what I'm about to tell you, because the audiences would have had their hands cocked, ready to throw figs, and they would have heard him go, what is his reason? What is his reason for treating me the way I am being treated? Because I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, hath not a Jew organs, dimensions, senses, feelings, passions, hurt by the same weapons, fed by the same foods. And you can imagine that they were stopped dead in their tracks. That instant can't be recreated unless we recast the audience into a 16th century audience. Certainly post-Holocaust, all Shylocks are played sympathetically. But even if it would have been played unsympathetically by actors in the 17th century, 18th century, certainly pre-Holocaust in England, you can't get away from that speech that humanizes that Jewish character to an audience where there were no Jews in the audience, and audiences that were anti-Semitic as easily as being a Torontonian and a Blue Jays fan. It was in mother's milk. So that's an extraordinary thing in the history of portraying Jews on stage. It is the most famous Jewish character in history and has brought with it. Look, Goebbels decided that that was the most often produced Shakespeare play in Nazi Germany. They just cut out the speeches that humanize him. They just make him a bad guy. And so, of course, Jewish people all the time, so you're not going to put Merchant of Venice on. Certainly you're not going to put please don't do that, not today. Rising anti-Semitism. There's a great line in the play that says, when was that time when anti-Semitism wasn't rising? Before or after Moses crossed the Red Sea? When was that? You know. So I've gone on a bit, but that's too...
I felt just now like I did last Saturday night when I watched you do the show. I just wanted to sit back and watch you do your thing.
Sorry.
And actually, I want to ask you a question about how you did your thing, because there was a moment in the play at the performance that I went to where somebody's cell phone went off right at a key moment. You were in the middle of a very dramatic part of your monologue. You didn't pay it any heed whatsoever. You didn't break character. You didn't do a thing. And the I think we took our signal from you, and we didn't notice it either. I was looking for people's heads turning, and nobody's heads turned. Did you hear it?
Oh, yeah.
You did hear it?
Oh, yeah, sure. You know, I have lines prepared for this, and I talk about it. I talk about it as the character Saul that I'm playing, which has got a lot in common with me, but not everything. There's some things that aren't true about me. But I'm ready for humor. I'm ready to say some stuff.
But not at that moment.
No,
You couldn't at that moment.
No, at that moment I saw it, I heard it, and I went, well, let's see how long this goes for. Because if it goes for too long, I can be in character and go, I'm going to just break now. I'm going to not break. There's no reason to break because there isn't anything broken. I'm playing me on stage talking to the audience, and I can easily go, I'm just going to wait. I think you should put it on speakerphone. I mean, and I'm going to wait for a second, but answer it. It may be important. You know, maybe it's your daughter or something. And I can do that, and humor will get me, I'm not going to be angry. It just happens, you know. Especially with older people who forget to turn their phones off. And I'm ready for it, but thank you for mentioning it. But at that moment, I was the first audience. I'd never had an audience. And it happened at an extraordinary moment.
At the worst time
at the
for
worst
it to happen.
time, right?
How do you not just completely lose your stuff at that moment?
Well, I didn't, losing my stuff is okay in that show. I can lose my stuff. I mean, I can even forget where I am. It's all right. I'm prepared for that.
Okay.
All right?
This question, forgive me, is obvious, but it was the first question that the group that I saw the play with asked afterwards. And that is, how the hell does he remember all those lines? You're up there by
Don't you
yourself.
get that question when you're 25 too? Yeah. How do you learn all those lines? I don't know.
I mean, you're up there by yourself for an hour and a half. How do you remember all that?
I've been doing this since I was, 7 years old.
But still, it's a lot. You'll grant it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a longer story. I can tell you. You're going to cut it out.
Try me.
Okay.
How do you remember all that?
You want to know?
Yeah. Why would I ask the question if I didn't want to know?
No. It's just a longer story because I'm a storyteller.
Okay.
Well, I'm 76.
Mm-hmm.
When I had a really good memory. I do not have a photographic memory. I've always had a good memory. And I've been doing this since I was 7, so it's a muscle, right? Mm-hmm. And you learn your lines and you have your own method. When I was 60, 16 years ago, I have friends who are actors. And I'd say, you come over for dinner, or we'll go out or whatever, and they go, I'm doing an episode of whatever, and I've got 3 pages to learn for tomorrow, and there's no way. I've got 4 pages, or I've got 2 scenes. And I go, I wonder why they, well, I'm not going to, I don't have that problem, thank God, Okay, I'll let it go. And then I got cast in a series called Warehouse 13 that I shot for 5 years here in Toronto for Sci-Fi. And I was the character that did facting. You know what that is now? It's called exposition stuff. Facting, I call it, instead of acting. I did a lot of acting, but it was facting. A lot of exposition was my character. And one day, the showrunner, Jack Kenny, wonderful man, came into the makeup trailer and said, I'm really sorry, the network blew up half this episode, and we got like 8 pages of monologue here. You don't have to do it over a month, over the next 3 weeks, a quarter of a page at a time, but you're going to have to fix with exposition why we're changing it. I said, okay, all right. So he handed it to me, 6, 7, 8 pages, full monologue. And I said, okay. He said, well, we don't have to do anything today. Tomorrow or the next day we'll do a little of it. Okay, all right, relax. And I was in my trailer, and they were 2 hours late with the shooting. And I came out 2 hours later, and I said, Jack, I think I could do the whole thing right now. And he said, what? You have photographic memory. I said, no. How'd you do that? I said, honestly, I don't know. And he went, okay. And he tested me. He said, come here. And I had it pretty much down, and we shot all of it that day. About a year later, we were in Los Angeles, and my wife and I were at dinner, and there was some people I didn't know. And she told this story, and I said, it was funny, right? I had no idea. And there was a woman there, a middle-aged woman, who said, what are you doing differently? I said, nothing. Turned out she was a neurologist. And I said, I'm not doing anything. No, nothing. No, I'm not suddenly jogging. And Eleanor said, yes, you are. And she said, what is he doing differently? He said, he taught himself how to play classical piano about 10 years ago. And that's true. We moved into a house that had a grand piano. My daughter had been 10, around 10 years old at the time, and she wanted to take piano lessons, and there was a piano in the house. We bought the piano with the house, refurbished it, and she got piano lessons, and I called a friend of mine, and I played guitar, and I called a composer, a friend of mine, and I said, I think I want to take lessons, piano. He said, why? I said, I love classical solo piano. He said, well, you play guitar, right? I said, I can play a little classical guitar. I taught myself, but this is different. He said, it's a lot different. I said, so I'm going to get a piano teacher. He said, you don't need a teacher. I don't need a piano teacher? He said, no. It's not going to be like a Music Man. I'm going to think minuet in G and I'm going to play it. He said, Saul, find a slow piece of classical music and call me. The one you love. And I said, okay, I mean, I can tell you right now. He said, what? I said, I love Moonlight Sonata. He said, well, that's perfect. I said, why? He said, you'll find out. He said, so here's what you do. Do you know how to read a bass clef? I said, no. He said, your daughter will show you. It'll take 5 minutes. Okay? You'll learn what the left hand does. It's what it is, how to read it. He said, Saul, you're never going to sight read. I said, what is that? He said, like, look at a piece of music that you've never seen before and start to play. That's 20,000 hours and, 8 hours a day for a number of years. I said, okay. And are you going to play in public? I said, are you kidding? No, it's just for me. I love it. He said, okay. So here's what you do, Saul. Memorize the first 2 bars with the right hand. I said, okay. It'll take you 20 minutes or less. It's very simple in Moonlight Sonata. Okay, I called him. I said, I got that now. He said, okay, now learn the left hand, the 2 bars. I said, yeah. Play them together. Not so easy. But, the left hand is mostly octaves. This finger and this finger, and that's it for that whole piece? He said, yeah, that's why it's perfect to start with. I said, okay. And then I said, okay, I've got 2 bars, left and right hand. What fingers do I use? I need a teacher. And he said, whatever comes easiest. I said, okay. And I said, now what? Do the next 2 bars, and then the next 2 bars. So what? He said, do it. So I had to memorize, because I can't sight read. I had to memorize all of Moonlight Sonata. He said, there's a downside. I said, what is it? Your family's going to learn to hate Moonlight Sonata. and until you get earphones and the right kind of piano. And within a month, I could play Moonlight Sonata. So the neurologist said, what you've done, and what do you play now? I was 61 at the time. I said, I played 25 pieces. I can play some Goldberg variations. I can play many of the nocturnes. I can play, Eric Satie. And he said, you memorize them. I have to. I can't sight read. And she said, what you've done for yourself over the last, when did you start? When you were 50? I said, yeah. I said, over the last 10 years, you have gotten rid of the Swiss cheese, or it's still there. That's what happens as you get older. But you've created synapses. You've created literally physical bridges that have enabled you to strengthen your memory. I'll bet it's better now than it was in your 20s. I said, it's a little better now than it was in my 20s. And that's how I could do it. Now you know.
I'm so glad I forced you to tell that story.
Well,
I love that.
Pick up the piano, guys. Learn an instrument.
I want to finish on something which I hope you won't think is too macabre. How old was your father when he died?
Well, it's a good question. He was my age, I thought, until I found his birth certificate and found out he lied about his age.
Because you say in the play
76.
he was 76,
yeah.
And you today are 76.
Yes, but it turns out that he was actually 6 years older than he said.
Ah, okay.
So he was 82.
So this last line of questioning then makes no sense whatsoever.
Go for it.
Because the question was going to be, how does that sit with you, being the age at which your father died?
It sits with me exactly as it felt on the stage, because at the moment I'm doing it on stage, it feels true. And it's an extraordinary moment for me on stage, but you have to see the play in a way to understand why. Yeah. Because in a way, the character is doing Shylock in a way for his father, who was an actor in Yiddish theater, which is also true about my father. He was an actor in Yiddish theater in Poland pre-Holocaust. So it has to do with, it isn't so much the exact number. It has to do with an actor in the last act of his life denied the opportunity to play the role of his lifetime. For that actor named Saul, who's always wanted to play Shylock, which isn't really true about this actor named Saul. But that actor named Saul really had his dream role taken out from under him. And so he's looking at his mortality and looking at his father's mortality. And his father never got to play it. And he only got to play it for so long before it was yanked. And so it has, the feeling that you're getting there has to do with what is possible for an artist to do when offending people. Is that, can you be an actor if only you can do things that don't offend people? Can you be an artist of any kind, a writer, a musician, I mean, if that's all we're allowed to do, then what are we there for? Is the whole feeling of the role and the character, right? And it's a good question because it has to do with this feeling that I've only got so much time left. But all of us have only so much time left, even if we're 20, we don't know. And that feeling of that death gives life meaning is in the moment of that artist, but it's also in the moment for all of us. Probably the most important line in the play for me is when my father's father, and this is a true story, my father's father, was my story my father told me because I couldn't hear it from my Zeta, from my grandfather, because he died in a concentration camp. But my father said, you know, his father was horrified when my father cut off his payas, his side curls, his Orthodox Jewish side curls, and became an actor. And my father had to explain why this sin, this indecency, this shanda, this shameful act that my grandfather said was so far away from God, why he was doing it. He was the oldest. I mean, all the other kids looked up to him. Why? Why would he do it? And my father says, probably the best definition for art that I'd ever heard, which was, if theater is good, then the audience sees themselves on the stage and they don't feel so alone. And my grandfather said, maybe he's not so far away from God after all. And to me, that the essence of the piece is in that exchange.
I am happy to say that people need to go see Playing Shylock, running through November 17th at the Berkeley Street Theatre in downtown Toronto, because you are phenomenal in it, as you have been over the last 20 plus minutes here for this conversation.
Thank you.
It's been a delight to get to know you, both on stage and here in our studio.
Thank you, thank you.
So thank you very much, Saul Rubinek.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Xavier, and I'm in grade 10. AI is becoming increasingly integrated into our daily lives, and of course, that impact will be felt more on the traditional work side, but how will that impact be felt on the creative side, the art side? For example, within the literary arts. Can one use AI tools while maintaining a sense of ownership over their art? And if so, at what point do you draw the line between that art being their own and a result of the AI?
My name is Valentine Goddard. I'm the founder and executive director of AI Impact Alliance, which is a nonprofit that I founded in 2017. And the goal was to study the different implications of AI, so the ethical, social, cultural, the legal implications of artificial intelligence. My opinions, my 2 cents, as an artist and as a lawyer, I wear both hats. So as you can see in my studio behind me, I use normal paint, analog paint. I use watercolor, acrylics, collage, film, 16 millimeter film. But then I also use artificial intelligence, and I use Runway ML. It's free. It's really fun to explore when you want to input your own art, for example, an image, and then a short video that you might have done of yourself moving, dancing, and then see what the resulting image or video is. So I've been doing a lot of that kind of research. And one of the questions, the ethical implications that I think is really important to consider is I don't think these tools enable everybody to tell their story in the same way. For example, if I put an image of a young girl, like let's say 8 or 9 years old, and it's a drawing I made of a little girl, the variations will age her, she might become a young adult all of a sudden. Sometimes it even takes their pants off. If I input an image of a beautiful Black woman, her skin after different variations might become whiter. When you prompt it for words like leader, very often the image that will come out will be of white men. So there's biases in what is being produced. As an artist, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you were talking about literary arts, that bias is also perceptible. So if you ask ChatGPT, for example, to finish a story with different family members, the end of the story will pick up on traditional roles that have been changing in the past many decades. So we have to remember that these tools will tell stories of the past. And if we want to talk about the future, I really think that as artists and cultural content creators, it will be our role to help these tools tell better stories and tell stories for everyone.
And that is the agenda for Friday, November 1st, 2024. On Monday, we explore how Holocaust education is changing and hope you can join us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you again right here on Monday. Next week on the agenda.
Often, I had been down in the U.S. and occasionally I would talk about my books or something. And Americans, very good-heartedly, but I think honestly said, had no idea. Didn't even know Canada was in the war. So that had happened enough times where I thought, okay, maybe it's not up to the Americans to tell this story. Maybe it's up to we Canadians.
That's next week on the agenda.